Okay, so Minoa Mycenae, when you see the term Hellenistic, think Greece. Think Greece. That's where anytime we talk about Hellenistic, it all dates back to Greece. So, create you with that. All right. All right, so check this out. So this is the Hellenistic world. You see here, this is right kind of in that area. There's the island of Crete. You see where Troy is located in Asia Minor. In other words, if you've heard of the story of Helen of Troy, then this is where she was from. This is where she was from. All right. And that's where she was from, and she's going to be taken, as we will talk about, that the Iliad and the Odyssey are about Helen of Troy and the Trojan War. There's a pretty decent movie called Troy that has, I think Brad Pitt, isn't that one of his big roles where he plays, I think, Achilles? If you know who Achilles was believed to be like a demigod, which means he is half man and half god. And so the story was that his mother took him and dipped him into some sort of like special thing to protect him so that he could never be hurt. And the problem is she held him by his heel. And so that was the only place that he is susceptible, is where that heel is. So that is why we call that the Achilles tendon that comes out of that heel. And so Achilles is shot in the heel and he dies in the Battle of Troy, according to the legend. Now, I mean, you know, the idea that he was the son of one of the goddesses, not Diana, she's the Roman one, but it was the equivalent. I always have to look up her name. But anyway, so a little background here. There is a famous work that I gave you a very small section of by a guy named Homer. You know, like Simpson. Homer. The name of the work is called the Iliad. And so here's what's interesting. With Homer, for many years, this work was thought to be fiction. Basically in the 8th century AD, so the 700s, Homer sits down and he writes down this story that is entitled the Iliad. And then he follows it up by writing a second work. If you want me to, I'll spell these for you, actually. The second work is the Odyssey. An Odyssey is a journey, by the way. So the second work is an Odyssey. So the Iliad and the Odyssey are the two works by Homer. And it's kind of interesting. We do know when Homer wrote the Iliad. It is suspected, some scholars think the Odyssey was written about 50 years before. There's a lot we don't know, basically. But we know he writes both. Another homecoming shirt. Okay. Both poems tell stories about conflicts between the Greeks and the Trojans. And the stories conclude with the Greek conquest of Troy. Now, it was up until the late 19th century, which would be the late 1800s. Okay, this is for, okay, thank you. Was this through the office? Yes, ma'am. Perfect. My life. It's a good problem. I could just find something else to sell as frequently as I sell those for like a week. But anyway, everything has its season. So both stories tell about the conflict between these two groups, and they all kind of come to a culmination with this famous battle happening in Troy. And so until the 19th century, late 1800s, these were seen as like every other place, as just like their fairy tales or legends. Because there's so much Greek mythology mixed in with the gods. You know, I mean, this guy has one place he's susceptible because somebody held his heel when they dipped him in like this special you can't shoot me juice, you know. And if I remember correctly, I think, was Achilles also the one in Greek mythology that he was given the choice if he wanted to have a short and glorious life or a long and boring one? I think that was he as well. And he chose short and glorious. And so there you go. But anyway, and so what changed that is going to actually be the archaeological work of a German businessman. A German businessman by the name of Henrik. Good German name there. Schliemann? I think. Yeah. Henrik Schliemann. So Henrik Schliemann is just really interested in these stories. And something about it kind of resonates to him that maybe these stories are not things that have just been made up. And so he does all of this archaeological work. Hello. I see him every day. Come on, John. Good. Grab your books. Just kidding. Come on. Eyes got big behind that mask. Go ahead. All right. I don't know. So he is an archaeologist. He does some excavations of Troy, as well as Mycenae, and some other sites that are told about in the tales.
Take all your trash.
His research actually makes some credibility to the fact these stories might be true. Now, to kind of give you, to put this into perspective for you. So my cousin, did they give you treats and stuff?
They took a picture.
I thought they were going to give you some of those treats. You need to go back and tell them they should share. They should share those. They shouldn't bring candy and torment you like that. I have an uncle whose last name, well, I had a great uncle. He married my great aunt, and his last name was Mann. Edward Mann was his name. Ed Mann. And Uncle Ed, when he came into our family, I was a little girl. Like I said, he married my great aunt when I was later in life, and he told these like outrageous stories. And all of our life, like we thought that he made these up, and I some of them had to be made up. I still believe that they are. But he swore that when Franklin Roosevelt died, that he actually got to ride on the train that carried Franklin Roosevelt's body to different places, that he was one of the train guards. You know, but it was one of those things, you would think if you did that, like you would have some sort of picture or memento, and he had a few different mementos, and he claimed that he had met 4 of the presidents. He actually had a commendation from one that he did have framed in his house, but everything just seemed so over the top. And so after he died, my uncle called me and he said, I need you to check out something for you because they think I'm an expert and can find all things historic, okay, like that I have this ancestry, like deep connection. And I said, okay, what is it? And he said, I think I saw Ed. And I'm like, well, Ed's been dead, so that's kind of weird. He said, no, I saw him on a documentary. So some random documentary of Franklin Roosevelt. He saw this guy that was on the funeral train car that looked like Uncle Ed. And so sometimes we think things are lies, but then we start finding evidence, and we still don't know if it was Uncle Ed. I mean, it was black and white TV, and, you know, he was a kid. So, but still, what you see here is when we start finding evidence that looks like it might be the truth, you start to go, wait a minute. And so there is believed to be some truth to this. So his research does put a lot of credibility to the presence of a civilization flourishing as much as 8 centuries before the golden age of Athens. So we will talk about Athens, Greece, and how it becomes such a big deal. But as much as 800 years before that, there is archaeological evidence that there were civilizations there that were flourishing. And so these were also followed by another guy who's going to do some digging near Crete. And there it also showed civilization that resembled the Mycenaean civilizations that were talked about in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And so once again, it's like all signs start pointing to, yeah, there may be something to this that's actually legitimate. All right, so let's start by talking about Minoa. Maybe. All right. Oh, and there's Homer, of course, with the Homer picture. So this is what this is a sculpture of Homer, just so you can kind of see what he actually supposedly looked like this. This was sculpted to appear as Homer appeared. So there you go. All right. Oftentimes when you see work from the Iliad and Odyssey, you'll see the Greek kind of constructions here to look like it. So good times. So let's talk a little bit about Minoan civilization. You will find, by the way, that the bull is very significant there. So a little bit about the background. This group is an early Aegean civilization. Aegean has to do with the fact that they are located along the Aegean Sea. So they're an early Aegean civilization. Remember, one of the major things that has to do with settlement always is about what? Water. Water is travel. Water brings food. Water brings water. Not necessarily salt water, but it's always based around water because water is life in a lot of ways. Just a quick reminder, if you're planning to do Voice of Democracy, which some of you really should, all of you really should, but some of you particularly have a gift with things like that. I need those in the next couple of weeks. I've previewed a few for the 10th graders that look really good. So if you have one you want me to preview, send it to me and I'll read your script. So this emerged around 3500 BC. Some interesting things. Their art derived from the artistic skills and the designs of places like Egypt, Mesopotamia, Asia Minor, as well as a local kind of nearby area called the Cyclades. The Cyclades is another community that is on the Aegean Sea. Some things that we see in their construction, in their pottery, and these things, some of the materials that they use. They use materials such as lead. They also use silver, which is not as much of a big surprise, but here's something they use that we haven't talked about in any other community thus far. Marble. They use marble furniture. Marble is very heavy, but it's also very sturdy. Think about like granite is kind of close to marble. Yeah, that's what always kind of takes me back to. So they kind of use the shiny, if you will, very solid rock furniture. So a few things about their buildings and such, some Minoan innovations. They have these great rambling palaces. You may not, this shows you some of the Cyclades typed pieces. In fact, there's a poster back there on the wall that is one of the Cyclade pieces from the islands there. So a lot of carvings, also a lot of artwork, like this shows what looks like maybe like a dolphin or a shark. So there you go. So their palaces, it calls it rambling palaces. Now when somebody rambles, that means they just go on and on and on, right? So these palaces are big and huge, and they just go on and on and on. Very excessive, if you will. Very excessive. This is an example of parts of an old one. You see the Grecian columns there. The use of very vibrant and loud color. So, and everything, really, even modern day Greek society, things are big and colorful. I'm very sad because usually in the fall I offer extra points if you will go to Greek Fest in Mobile. Have any of you ever been to anything like that? Okay, so Greek Fest is the best thing ever. It is like this whole, you pay just a few dollars to get in, And it's like the International Festival as far as food, but it's not like big, huge. It's not as big as far as like 40 different booths that you go to. But they have really good food, and it's very Greek. And
I've never had
very
Greek
different.
food. What's it like?
It's kind of, it's very, you ever had anything called Mediterranean? Greece is in the Mediterranean.
Is it flavorful?
It
Probably
depends
would
on,
eat it.
yeah, it is like hummus. Hummus is Mediterranean.
Yeah.
Hummus to me depends on who makes it.
I feel like it would be close to like kind of like Italy, kind of.
You would think that, and some, not a lot of pasta. They do have some like Spoka. I've got a menu somewhere from last year's.
I
In
want to
fact-
see. Greece is my dream vacation destination, but I'm picky. I don't know what I would eat. I want to go to Santorini.
I think they canceled it. I'm almost positive.
Santorini.
Wait a minute. Oh, that's 19. Yeah, that means it's canceled. All right, let's see. Yeah, it kicked it back to 19.
They do a bunch of seafood.
They do a lot of
I
seafood.
like seafood.
They're all, yeah.
Do they
I've
like
seen
shrimp?
There's a really good place that I think you would enjoy. I don't see I think actually all of you would enjoy. We have some friends that own a restaurant in Mobile. He started it, and his name is, I'll have to see if I can find that menu for you guys. His name is Vlad. He's actually Bulgarian, and it's a little chain restaurant called I can't believe I just forgot this. The Mediterranean Sandwich Company.
Is Glory Bound like Greek food? Like euros? Isn't that
Yeah,
Greek food?
yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I like those, I think.
And isn't
I like them plain, like just meat and
what's it called? It's a Mexican brand.
Finds its
Fancy.
expression students and teachers.
Oh, are you
We have
talking about the nice
calculated our
restaurant?
votes for homecoming queen
Phoenicians is-
and king. Of course, homecoming queen will be announced next week during our homecoming court presentation. But we would like to announce our homecoming king for the 2020-2021 school year. Congratulations to everyone who
I
participated.
was like, who
The
starts with an
homecoming
E?
king this year is Mr. Kayron Leverett. Let's give Kayron a hand.
He was the only guy that I hadn't taught. I had taught all the boys other than Kron, but he's always been nice. Okay.
Right.
Yay.
Yeah,
Good.
I'm talking about Greek.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah. Well, Mediterranean Greek, yes.
right.
They're probably more Mediterranean, but it's a very fine line.
this is gonna sound really dumb, but isn't like teriyaki chicken Mediterranean food? Or am I-
Teriyaki is going to be more like Japanese. Yeah. More Asian. But they have some similar dishes to that. Anything like with chickpeas, typically in a Mediterranean diet, they eat more vegetables than we eat.
Yeah.
Like there is a literal Mediterranean This Week in History podcast about it that became really popular after Eisenhower 1960. One of the big proponent that eating in the Mediterranean style caused you to live.
They mostly use olive oil.
Yes. Lots of vegetables. But I do like Greek food. They have some spanini. There's several like sweet dishes they have that are really good. So lots of olives, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, a little bit about these. They have these great palaces. The palaces are decorated with paintings. The palaces are decorated with statues. These elaborate statues. And a lot of multicolored pottery. I think honestly, a lot of a Greek church even, show you a picture of the inside of Greek, it's somewhere between very pretty and almost gaudy. It's somewhere between very pretty and almost gaudy because it is just so almost over the top colorful.
Ew.
So it's very, but that's very Greek. That's very much them, and it's very much what it looks like. And, just there's a lot of color. There's painting everywhere. And that is even true about their society at this time. So anyway, but if you get the chance when they have Greek Fest, hopefully next year, you can actually go into their synagogue there, and they'll tell you about the Greek Orthodox religion. You don't have to, but then you can go and see Greek dancing, and it's really neat. I enjoy it. All right. And speaking of that, I doubt I haven't heard anything about the international festival, so I have a feeling that's a no-go this year. Some other things about them. Their art usually has art topics that include plants, animals, marine life. So, that would be sea creatures. And the other thing is young people playing games. Young people playing games. Like, they don't do a lot of art with the elderly. Their art is usually about young people. And so I want to take you back to a piece of artwork that I had up here a minute ago, this one. And this is a practice of theirs we will talk about shortly. And this is what they love, these different games. The most famous and strange one that they like is a practice called bull leaping. Literally leaping over bulls. Now, this is like bull riding before bull riding was cool, apparently. And so they enjoy bull leaping. It is not just a male sport. It is both male and female who enjoy leaping. Who would try it?
I probably would.
You try leaping over a bull? Madison, you in? Madison's like, absolutely not. I would never do that in a million years. Basically, we also think that possibly there was something religious to it, but it's one of those things that they just kind of suspect, because just for random people to be like, what do you think, Bob? Let's just go outside and leap that bull. But this is what they would do. They would leap the bulls.
I want to know if it was like over their back, like this way.
That's what,
like
based on the architecture, it kind of looks like they're like swinging over them.
Jump over the bull, you're closer to God.
And the higher you get on the bull, the closer you are to Jesus. Hallelujah. If you get stepped on by the bull, you get real close. So there you go. And so is this possibly where some of the modern day bull things like running with bulls comes from? No. But here you see, they'll still do some of this bull leaping in Greece. And so sometimes you're leaping outside of the thing to try to keep from getting stuck. So that's always fun. All right. Some other things that they like to do, boxing. Boxing was another Greek sport. I can probably get into boxing a lot more than I can get into bull leaping. As well as acrobatics. So they were all into being acrobatic and, using the body. It's like your society, man.
Right.
But just wait.
No wonder.
So let's talk a little bit about their religion. There's some weird random statues that include these kind of topless looking women that are handling snakes. So maybe they were snake handlers. Not feeling it, Sydney? Sydney's going to change your mind here.
I'll stick to the acrobatics part.
Or perhaps it's a fertility symbol. Not exactly sure what to think about the topless snake handling woman. But at any rate, there is some suspicion as to how this ties into their religion, whether it's part of handling snakes or fertility. But what we do know about them for sure is that we know they had a centralized government. They had a centralized government. Now, help me out a little bit. What does central government mean? We talked about this before. What is central versus, there's the central government versus the state government. Yeah, it's like your federal. It's your big name. It's all of Greece is ruled united. It's a kingdom. It's not a bunch of chiefdoms here, okay? And so we do see that they have a strong central government. We also see, I'll keep those actually. We also see that they have cities. So they have urban areas as well as they are a theocratic society. What does theocratic mean? Maybe theocratic doesn't kind of ring true with you. What about theocracy? Ruled by what? By religion, yeah. So it's about theology, theocracy. So a theocratic government, a lot of their choices are based on what they think the gods would like. That whole pantheon of people. All right. So one of the things that they would do is toloi. Now, the Greek Orthodox Church today doesn't believe in all that other than just to celebrate culture, but toloi. This was communal religious activities. As early as 3000 BC, they would hold these toloi, these communal religious activities. And the palaces probably served as the center of religious activities. The palaces probably served as the center of these religious activities. What's kind of interesting here is something that was frequently found in the palace is going to be the double axe. What is the double axe? What do we mean by a double axe? Well, first of all, just to make sure you're understanding me here, this is the tholoi. This is where they would celebrate in this beehive-shaped type things. And so we're not completely sure what the role of the double axe is because it is found in the palace. But it is believed to be the primary instrument used in sacrifice. And so there are symbols of new life that are found around the palaces sometimes from the blood of the victim. So there you go. We believe Minoa to be very stable. Why is that?
Like human sacrifice or animal sacrifice?
Some of both, probably. We believe Minoa to be very stable for one reason. They don't really have fortifications, like forts. So if you're not building like how you have the Great Wall of China, people start invading, so they build a wall.
Oh, okay.
So if
Nobody
you're not,
was bothering them.
yeah, if you're not fencing in, you're not having problems, right? You know, if you live out in the middle of nowhere, you don't have animals, you don't have anything else, you're probably not just going to build a random fence just to build a fence, right? Fences serve a purpose. And so if they're not trying to fortify, they're not being attacked by outsiders, is what we can assume. However, their art does depict warfare. And so what we see here that they use the most tends to be their fleet. Their Minoan fleet. So that tells you that their invaders weren't next door. But the invaders were actually in the water. This is the double axe, by the way, if you want to see what their double axe looks like.
Oh, that's familiar. Like the illusion.
Yep, and you can see what looks like possibly some blood there, the red.
Love that.
Good times. So a couple of other things before we move on to the Mycenaeans. Come back to Minoa here in the double X. The isolation of the sea actually helps protect them a lot. It's kind of like the concept of Great Britain. Because Great Britain is her own island, army isn't as significant to her as navy. Because that's really what she needs. And so this is what you see with these guys. They are protected by geography in a lot of ways. They are seafarers. Kind of like if you see Moana when she has this big moment, she's like, we were voyagers. And you're like, well, you think because, how did you get there? Pretty much a deal. So they traded with places like Asia Minor. They traded with Asia Minor, Syria, North Africa, the Aegean Islands, and Spain. So they trade with all these nations all over. They trade with all of these different nations.
Okay, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So, you know how, like, a bunch of people thought the world was flat or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and, like, didn't want to go in the water or whatever? How are they trading all these people? Like, how do you get to North Africa if you
Well, remember, yes, they think the world is flat, but they're in that part that they think is part of the flat part. Like at this point, they realize those other places exist, right? But they're not like trying to go past there. Yeah, that's a good question. But they do have those boundaries. And so, yes, you can. So some things they're going to import. They import tin and copper. They import tin and copper. They have those items there. There is no way they naturally have them there. So we know they're trading with these places. We know they're importing stuff. So there you go. All right, so let's talk about Minoan agriculture. It seems like their peasantry, or their poor people, were a large group, and they were mostly semi-free. They pretty much had the same rights as your elites, which is very different than some other parts of the world, right? Some things that they produced and had were wine, olive oil, and grain, particularly barley and wheat. Barley and wheat. I misspelled that here. There we go. All right. These became known as the Mediterranean triad. That wine, that grain, and that olive oil. That's just kind of part of a lot of things that, you think about in the Mediterranean. You think about their fresh bread. You think about the olive oil, and the wine is something they're known for as well. And so these crops kind of become what people come to their areas searching for. So a few things about this society. By 1500, their economy had reached a complex level, and they required extensive record keeping. They are going to keep these records on clay tablets.
Is it BC or AD?
This is BC still. Now, what's interesting about these clay tablets is they use a script that is obviously consistent, but scholars in those areas have not deciphered yet how their script works, as far as they haven't interpreted it yet. So you can't Google translate the script that they use. But obviously they had a script that they knew what it meant. We just don't understand it. All right. So what is the couple other things? Aristocratic women. Now, what does it mean to be an aristocrat?
Rich.
Yes. Wealthy, important people. The wealthy and important women were given very high status in the communities. They were given very high status during communities. Also, they were not confined to the public sphere. They weren't confined to the home. Unlike Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia, women stayed at home. The men were out in the public doing all this stuff. Women participated in public ceremonies and events. So we don't see like complete equality here, but we are seeing more freedoms for women in Minoan society than we do in the others. So what destroyed the Minoans? A cataclysmic earthquake is going to strike a volcano to erupt in the town of Thera. And Thera is Thera. And so it is going to spur, they believe, that volcanic eruption. This happens about 60 miles north of Crete. And it's okay. A volcano erupts. It erupts in the community of Thera, and it's about 60 miles north of the island of Crete where the Minoans lived. And we believe it seriously disrupted their life. I can only imagine. And so where it takes place, the Minoans basically still flourished at that time around 1500, and it seems like the extraordinarily rich settlement on Thera seemed to have been abandoned. So at the first signs of volcanic activity, and probably they can see that this is erupting, and so we believe that probably the initial life of loss was relatively small. However, as fate would have it, the eruption would have generated a devastating tsunami, which is basically tsunami. It's really intensive waves. They are an island. And so this generated this devastating tsunami that would send huge waves off the north coast of Crete. And any of their ships, anything like that, must have just absolutely been destroyed. They did survive, but they were hanging on basically by a thread. This is pretty much, it pretty much destroys their civilization, which I can imagine that. When we have things like hurricanes, like I think about Sally and how that just ravaged through particularly the Florida Panhandle. I mean, we had some stuff in Alabama. If you get closer to Gulf Shores, they had a little more. But if you look at like Pensacola and the damage that was done there, it's ridiculous. And what we start to look for when we have those kind of tragedies in today's society is we look for outside assistance, right? We look for help. And so what happens here is they do want help, but I mean, it's not like, that there's like a whole government set up that can help them and take care of things. And so pretty much with that, you're on your own. And so that's why something like this would kind of be the end of your world, If you rebuild, the idea of rebuilding quickly, all of these palaces and things that they have constructed, it doesn't work like that. You can't just pop it up and it's there tomorrow. It doesn't work like that. So a little bit about the Mycenaeans. From around 1500, maybe as early as 1900, but from around 1500, shortly before this, there were settlements of early Greek speakers that appeared in southern Greece, what today is now known as Greece. This group was highly influenced by the Minoans. So people began to leave that area and move into this other area. And this group retains their political independence. So they are not controlled by the Minoans, although they kind of follow the Minoans' patterns. And so they began to develop cities. The couple of cities we want to mention, the first is Mycenae. Big surprise there, since that's what we're talking about. And the second is Tiryns. So the city of Mycenae and then the city of Tiryns are going to develop as part of this new civilization coming out in the southern part of Greece that is not controlled by the Minoans. Now, what we begin to see in these civilizations, according to Homer, is that the lands nearby recognized the overlordship of the Mycenaean kings. So these Mycenaeans are warriors. They are savage, if you will. I'm on the wrong. I'm an idiot. I'm trying on that screen to use my mouse on that screen to move the screen. It doesn't work. All right. And so the Mycenaeans very quickly are going to expand their influence. So if you look at the map, you see where southern Greece is, where they would have been in here, and where they're going to very rapidly kind of spread out to all of these other places. If you're familiar with Greek mythology, Thebes and Athens are places that you would have heard of, for sure, in the Grecian islands. So how is this group different than the Minoans? Well, first, they emphasize fortifications. The Minoans did not. They emphasize making forts. So this shows you they are more of a war-based society. And what type of war? Land or sea?
Probably land.
Yeah, you're going to have some land wars. If you're making forts, if you're fortifying, you're doing it to protect yourself. Some ways they are the same. They adopted the Minoan script. So the same ways the Minoans write, they write. And this is kind of something that is interesting. So the Minoan script, the unique Minoan script, completely Minoan. This is a picture of what it would look like. If you can see, it's just like, it looks like scribbling. Like here you see it looks like a Y with a slash, and then here you see what looks like a plus sign, and this looks like a weird 3 with like a line through it. And so it kind of looks similar to our characters, but we have no idea what this means. And so this is referred to as linear A. This is purely Minoan script. However, as these new Greek languages begin to develop, they're going to use what's called linear B. Now, if you see this, it's a little more organized, and it becomes common in several of these different Greek series. It's a set of written characters, and it resembles symbols. And in some languages or stages of writing that seem to serve as like an alphabet. So we kind of feel like we have a better grasp on this than we do on linear A.
If they all had like different ways to write, I feel like.
I mean, it had to be so confusing. It really did.
Because you know how like everybody's English is the same, everybody's Spanish is the same.
But if you're in Greek society, and so, you know, and these things don't develop like, so around 1580, when they moved to Greece, they probably, and then what begins to happen with the Mycenaeans is theirs starts to develop a little differently. That, from what I've read, happened, but it had to be very, if you didn't know any better, and only your very least would know how to read probably anyway. So it isn't like everyday Joe is like, you know, well, what book is that, or what language is that book published in, you know?
Yeah.
But it is something complicated when you think about how systems of writings work. And yeah, their art and architecture were highly influenced still by Minoa. And even their customs, guess what they like to do?
Bull jumping.
Yes, they are bull leapers. They're still Sydney's people.
Yep.
Mycenaean women even adopted Minoan dress styles and cosmetics. So they even adopted the Minoan dress, hairstyles, and cosmetics. A little bit about Mycenaean trade and seafaring. By 1475, they were starting to challenge the sailors of Minoa for who is the prime ruler of the Aegean Sea. Now think about this with me. Why would they challenge, why could they challenge the Minoans? Well, they could do it because the Minoans had basically been wiped out because of that tsunami. So they're able to kind of challenge them, if you will. All right. So in that same year, a band of Greeks are going to seize, and I'll show you back where this is on the map. They're going to seize Knossos. Let's see. Went too far. This one, yeah. So that is down here. And that is with the island Crete there. So Crete becomes under the authority here of the Mycenaeans. With that, the band of Greeks that sees it there, the writing, kind of going back to what you were saying, Emily, in that region of Crete is going to switch to linear B. So they start writing again more in linear B, less in linear A. So we see that strong influence, again, of the Minoans being taken over by the Mycenaeans. So it's kind of like where the younger overtakes the older here. So the Mycenaeans, the Minoans were invaded by other Mycenaean Greeks to eventually, it really no longer resembles Mycenae or Minoa anymore, and it basically resembles Mycenae. Between 1400 and 1200, they're going to expand their commerce, and they're going to dominate Aegea and Asia Minor. They dominate Aegea, and Asia Minor. It is during this time that it is believed that the king of Mycenae led other Greeks to war with Troy. Thus, the stories of the Odyssey and the Iliad. So during this time period, between 1400 and 1200 BC. So while the Trojan War occurred, the Dorian Greeks were causing internal conflicts with the Mycenaean Greeks. So to kind of bring you Dorians, D-O-R, I just butchered that, I-A-N. The Dorian Greeks are your people that are around Troy. Your people that are around Troy.
And what do they do?
They are causing problems with the Mycenaeans. There's some suspicion here that they might have been a different Greek ethnicity, already residing as subjects. They had their own culture. They don't appear heavily influenced by the Minoa and Mycenaean cultural exchange that we've talked about with bull leaping and all this other stuff. But they do appear to be influenced here. They in fact destroyed the culture through military violence. And city after city is going to be destroyed throughout the 1100s. Now, if you knew about kind of the legend of what happens that starts the Trojan War, it is Helen of Troy, as the beautiful ruler's daughter, is taken. And she is taken by the ruler of the other area, which I never remember his name. We only remember Helen.
Did she go
Seems like she went willingly. But her family wasn't very proud of this. And so the Trojans come and they attack the Greeks, and basically they're winning.
The family's daughter that got taken fights them?
Yes. And so the long story short ends up happening when the Trojans basically think they've won, and the Greeks are like, okay, you won, and they bring them this big horse, right?
As a peace offering.
As a peace offering. There's an old expression, beware of Greeks bearing gifts. And it's based on the Trojan horse. And so that night, the Trojans are celebrating their victory, and the Greeks all slip out of this big, this had to be a massive horse. So all the Greek soldiers slip out of this massive horse, and they begin to kill the Trojans, and they win.
Like they were in.
I don't know why, but me and my boyfriend's family talked about that the other night at dinner. I don't know how it came up. We just started talking about horses, and then that came up. It was kind of funny, and now that we're talking about it, it's weird.
Isn't it ironic how things like that kind of go in circles?
It
Out
always
of
seems
the
to happen to
horse.
me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think out of its butt.
Oh. Okay.
I'm not exactly sure what part of the anatomy it came out of, but there's only, it had to be something closer to the belly area, so very possible. All right. But anyway, so the Greeks, with this, they go into kind of a period called the Greek Dark Ages. And that period lasts from about 1120 to about 800 BC. The Dorians left Greece in shambles. Most of the Greeks became illiterate. Because education costs you something. It may not always cost you money, but if nothing else, it costs you time. And so they become illiterate. They become disconcerted with this. When they did write, they don't use the Minoan syllabary anymore. Instead, they start to write in a language that belonged to the Phoenicians. Yeah. Kind of like Phoenix. They're kind of similar to Phoenix. But they use this language that belonged to the Phoenicians. So we see this big transition here. Most of the society of Greece fell into the rule of the Dorian Greeks. Particularly, a dominant city became the city of Sparta. If you're familiar with the Spartans and all that kind of stuff. So Sparta, this warrior culture, becomes this dominant city. Political authorities begin to crumble, and the Greeks even divided back into tribes, and the tribes subdivided into clans, which clans are usually more like family relations. And so it's like their society is digressing. And so that's why it's referred to as the Greek Dark Ages. So they divide back into tribes, and then the tribes divide into clans. A clan was a number of related families with their own distinctive religious cults. They also usually owned their own land, and were responsible for their own wealth. The rulers of these clans were usually the elders. The elder family members were the ones who would make the decisions for the rest of the clan. Yet, despite all of this, Homer produced some of the most important Greek stories that molded this Hellenistic world, and his works were crucial to the Greeks, especially when you talk about the Greek Pantheon. The Greek Pantheon. So this shows you where Sparta is, where Mycenae is, where Athens is. So this is a statue of what the Dorian Greeks believed to have looked like. Again, it's very much Sparta here. Yeah. Okay, so a couple of things to mention. The two major members of the Pantheon in ancient Greece, there are two major brothers that are part of this whole slew of gods. Have any of you ever taken mythology or studied any about Greek mythology?
Yes, I love mythology.
It's interesting. Well, there's two major brothers that we need to discuss. One is going to be Poseidon. And Poseidon is the god of the
Water.
Yeah, he is the sea god, the water god. And Poseidon is Minoan. He was a part of Minoan culture, which that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Where did they live? They were on the sea. And then the second god here is going to be Zeus.
He's God of the sky, right?
Particularly, he is the god of thunder. But yes, he's associated with the sky. The god of thunder. Now, where Poseidon is Minoan, Zeus is Dorian. Like Sparta, he is Dorian. So the thunder god, and he also rules Olympus, where all the gods hang out. He is like the head god of the pantheon.
Where does Hades come in? 'Cause he's their brother too.
Yeah, but he gets the least attention.
He don't-
Yeah. And that's why he's so bitter. All right, so the rise of classical Greece here is the Dark Ages end. The Greek polis again becomes city-states. They go back away from the clans, and they turn into these little city-states. Also, the Greek cities become the center of culture and learning once more. The polis was the Greek answer to conflict. They would settle things. And so this begins to change, really. No large force invades them until the Persians. So they are going to be consistent. The leaders of the political tribes became hereditary. So that it became an aristocracy, if you will, where this person's children will rule and then their children will rule. And so much like we see in our other societies that we talked about, the Greeks begin to colonize by 750 to 550. The Greeks began using the sea to colonize new lands. 750 to 550. There is a reason. There are two substances I told you that they liked that they could not get in Greece. And what were those? Do you remember? Yes, iron and copper. So those two things in other in short supply in Greece. They also developed their own trading stations. They began to develop their own cities to help with their trading. And some colonies even began to make their own colonies. So you have colonies that you've made that are colonizing themselves. And so you see this further expansion of Greece. But that society is not going to last. That brings us to the tyrants. The tyrants. So the Greek city-states from 650 to 550 BC are going to begin to have problems with the tyrants. And basically, these leaders adopted citizens' armies. They called the citizen armies hoplites. Citizen armies that were called hoplites. Hoplites would carry a shield. It was called a hoplon. So the hoplites carried a hoplon. And so because you start to have these citizen armies, the colonial movement is going to kind of start to go down as more of these military powers rise up. Much like Carthage and Persia, the tyrants were rulers who didn't have hereditary claim. And so they come in without legal claim, and they begin to upset the aristocratic society, which we will talk about after your test next week, probably on Wednesday. So that's it. All right, so we have